I'm an American, and I went off the deep end. When someone abandons himself to being a victim, he's going to have to be one.
Most killers try to hide. He didn't. In fact, while police were desperately hunting one of the most disturbing criminals in California history, he was sitting right next to them, laughing, drinking, listening as they tried to figure out who he was. And the craziest part, they liked him. He wasn't some shadowy figure lurking in the dark. He was charming, intelligent, the kind of guy you'd trust without thinking twice. A gentle giant, they called him. But behind that friendly smile was something far more disturbing than anyone could imagine. Because while the town of Santa Cruz was unraveling young women vanishing, body parts turning up in the most unthinkable places, no one realized the truth. The man responsible wasn't hiding. He was right there in the open. And what he was doing in secret would shock even the most experienced investigators. So how does someone go from being welcomed by police to becoming one of the most feared killers in America? And more importantly, how did no one see it coming? Santa Cruz in the early 1970s felt like a dream. A quiet coastal town where the days were slow, the beaches were full, and life carried the carefree energy of a new generation. The rise of the university brought an explosion of youth, freedom, and the kind of culture where hitchhiking wasn't seen as dangerous. It was normal. Strangers trusted each other. Doors weren't always locked. And for many young people, especially college students, Santa Cruz felt like the perfect escape. But that illusion didn't last, because almost overnight something changed. At first, it was just whispers. A missing girl here, another one there. Easy to dismiss in a place where people came and went all the time. But then the discoveries started. Not full bodies, pieces. Remains found in the mountains. Fragments washing up along the shoreline. Each one raising the same terrifying question no one could answer. What is happening to this town? Fear spread fast. Parents started worrying. Students looked over their shoulders. Police, they were completely in the dark. There was no clear pattern. No obvious suspect. Just young women, mostly hitchhikers, vanishing without a trace. And as the number kept growing, the media gave the nightmare a name that would stick. The Coed Butcher. But what no one realized yet was that the person behind it all wasn't some outsider passing through. He was already there, watching, waiting, blending in perfectly with everyone else. And what he was about to do next would make the fear even worse. While fear was spreading across Santa Cruz, the killer was doing something no one expected. He was getting closer to the police, not watching from a distance, not hiding in the shadows, sitting with them. Night after night, officers would gather at their usual bar, unwinding after long shifts, talking through the case that was haunting the entire town, the missing girls, the scattered remains, the growing pressure to find whoever was behind it. And right there in the middle of those conversations was him, Edmund Kemper. They called him Big Ed. 6'9", towering over almost everyone in the room, but somehow he never came across as intimidating. Quite the opposite. He was friendly, easy to talk to, the kind of guy who could hold a conversation with anyone and make you feel comfortable within minutes. He laughed with them, shared drinks, listened closely as they discussed the investigation. Sometimes he even joined in, and that's what made it so chilling. Because while officers were trying to piece together clues, they had no idea they were casually talking to the person responsible for everything. To them, he was just another familiar face, a regular, someone harmless. But there were small details, things that didn't quite fit. Kemper wasn't just a random guy. He had a past one that had technically been erased, hidden behind sealed records, a past that involved violence, serious violence. And one day, almost by accident, that past came dangerously close to being exposed. It started with something simple, a routine check, a firearm purchase. Nothing unusual until someone noticed something buried in his record that shouldn't have been there. A red flag, one that should have changed everything. But it didn't. Not yet. Because even standing right in front of him, even looking him in the eye, no one truly understood who they were dealing with. And the truth behind, Big Ed was far darker than anyone was prepared for. Long before anyone in Santa Cruz knew his name, the warning signs were already there. And they started early. As a child, Edmund Kemper didn't grow up in a normal home. His relationship with his mother was cold, tense, and filled with constant criticism. She didn't just discipline him, she tore him down. Repeatedly. Making him feel unwanted. Inferior, almost like he didn't belong. But what made it worse was what happened at night. She would lock him in the basement, alone, in the dark, for hours. Not because he had done something wrong, but because she believed he might become dangerous. She feared he could harm his own sisters one day. Imagine that, being treated like a threat before you've even done anything. And over time, something inside him started to change. His thoughts became darker, more violent, more obsessive. It started with small things. He would take his sister's dolls and remove their heads. Not out of curiosity, but with intention. Almost like he was acting out something he didn't fully understand yet. And it escalated. Animals, he began hurting them, controlling them, testing boundaries that most people would never even think to cross. And that's when it became clear this wasn't normal behavior. But no one stopped it. No one truly stepped in. So those thoughts kept growing, evolving, becoming more detailed, more intense, until eventually imagination wasn't enough anymore. At just 15 years old, that line was crossed. He picked up a rifle and ended the lives of his own grandparents. And what he said afterward made it even more disturbing. He claimed he didn't want his grandfather to suffer finding out his wife was gone. So he took his life too. It didn't make sense. It wasn't logical. But in his mind, it was justified. That moment should have been the end of his story. Instead, it became the beginning. Because what happened next gave him something far more dangerous than freedom. It gave him time to learn. After taking the lives of his grandparents, most people assumed Edmund Kemper would never walk free again. At just 15 years old, he was sent to a secure psychiatric facility, diagnosed, evaluated, and labeled as deeply disturbed. On paper, this was where his story should have ended. But it didn't, because inside that institution, something unexpected happened. Kemper didn't break down. He adapted. He watched, listened, learned. Surrounded by some of the most dangerous and unstable individuals, he was absorbing everything, how they thought, how they acted, how they were evaluated, and more importantly, what the experts were looking for. He studied the system from the inside, and the more he understood it, the easier it became to manipulate. Doctors saw a different version of him. Calm, cooperative, intelligent, a model patient. He said the right things, showed the right emotions, played the role perfectly, but none of it was real. Behind that controlled behavior, the same violent thoughts were still there, quiet, but growing stronger. And here's the part that changed everything. He was given access, trusted by staff, allowed to assist with tasks, even exposed to sensitive material, case files, psychological reports, detailed accounts of violent behavior. Information most people would never see. For Kemper, it wasn't treatment. It was training. Years passed, and eventually, the experts reached a conclusion that would shock people later on. They believed he was no longer a threat, that he had been rehabilitated. So, at 20 years old, Edmund Kemper walked out, free. But there was one critical recommendation. Do not send him back to live with his mother. That warning was ignored. And the moment he returned to that same environment, the same tension, the same resentment, everything that had been building inside him came rushing back. Only this time he wasn't a confused teenager anymore. He was smarter, more controlled, and far more dangerous. And what he chose to do next was anything but random. Freedom didn't change Edmund Kemper. It refined him. By the time he was back on the streets, he wasn't acting on impulse anymore. He wasn't reckless. Every move he made was calculated, controlled, almost patient. And he had already chosen his targets, young women, specifically college girls. Because in the early 70s, hitchhiking wasn't unusual, it was part of the culture. Students did it every day without thinking twice. It was easy, normal. And for someone like Kemper, it was the perfect system. But here's what made him different. He didn't start killing right away. He practiced. Over and over again, he would pick up hitchhikers, drive them around, study their behavior, and then let them go. Watching how they reacted, learning what made them comfortable, what made them nervous. He was rehearsing, perfecting a version of himself that felt completely safe. Calm voice, friendly conversation. No sudden movements. A good guy. And once he felt confident enough, everything changed. One day, he picked up two 18-year-old girls. They had no reason to be afraid. He looked normal, spoke normally. Nothing felt off until it was too late. At some point during the drive, he created a small distraction, something simple that forced them to shift their attention for just a moment. That's all he needed. From there, the situation escalated quickly. Control was taken. Fear set in, and what followed was brutal. By the time it was over, both girls were gone, and Kemper had crossed a line he had been building toward for years. But what shocked investigators later wasn't just the crime itself. It was what came after. Because for Kemper, the act didn't end when their lives did. That was only part of it. And as disturbing as that first crime was, it was just the beginning of something far worse. Crossing that line didn't slow him down. It unlocked something. After that first double murder, Edmund Kemper didn't panic, he evolved. Each time, he became more confident, more precise, more comfortable with what he was doing. The fear that might stop most people, it wasn't there anymore. Instead, there was control. And that's what he chased. He continued picking up hitchhikers, young women who saw him as nothing more than a helpful stranger. His size made him noticeable. but his personality disarmed any suspicion. He spoke calmly. He smiled. He made them feel safe. Until they weren't. Victim after victim, the pattern continued. Some disappeared without a trace. Others were only found in fragments, scattered across remote areas, as if someone was trying to erase them completely. But Kemper wasn't just trying to get away with it. He was building something in his mind, a sense of power. To him, these weren't people anymore. They were objects, something he could control, manipulate, and dominate completely. That need for control went far beyond the moment of the attack. It followed him home. And that's where things became even more disturbing. Because while the town was searching for answers, while families were desperately hoping for any sign of their daughters, Kemper was living a double life that almost didn't make sense. By day, he was the same Big Ed, friendly, talkative, sitting in bars with police officers, blending in like nothing was wrong. By night, he was someone else entirely. And somehow, he managed to keep those two worlds completely separate. No suspicion, no direct evidence, nothing that pointed back to him. It was like he didn't exist, but the more he got away with it, the more dangerous he became. Because at some point, it stopped being about getting away with it. It became about pushing further, testing limits, seeing how far he could go without anyone stopping him. And for a while, no one did. But then, something small, something almost insignificant started to crack that perfect illusion. And once it did, everything began to fall apart. For months, Edmund Kemper had been untouchable. No witnesses, no solid leads, nothing that pointed back to him. It was almost perfect until something small, almost routine, disrupted everything. It wasn't a mistake during one of his crimes. There wasn't a witness coming forward. It was a paperwork issue, a simple firearm record. When Kemper attempted to purchase a gun, something unusual appeared in his background, something that had supposedly been erased. A past incident, serious enough to raise concern. That one detail caught attention. And suddenly, a detective was sent out to speak with him. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal, just a standard visit. A quick check to confirm whether he was legally allowed to own a weapon. But for Kemper, it meant something completely different. The moment he saw law enforcement standing in front of him, something shifted in his mind. He didn't see a routine check. He saw a threat. He became convinced that they knew that this wasn't random, that they were closing in on him, even though they weren't. The interaction itself was calm, controlled. He handed over the weapon without resistance. Nothing dramatic, nothing suspicious on the surface, but internally, everything was spiraling. Yes, for the first time, Kemper felt exposed, and that feeling triggered something dangerous. Paranoia, fear, pressure. All the control he had built over months started to crack. And instead of stopping, instead of disappearing, he made a decision that would take everything to a completely different level. Because there was one person he had thought about for years. One person at the center of everything he had become. And now, convinced that time was running out, he decided it was finally time to act on it. That moment of paranoia changed everything. Once Edmund Kemper believed the police might be closing in on him, his thinking stopped being methodical and started becoming urgent. Controlled confidence was replaced with something far more unstable pressure building behind his calm exterior. And that pressure had a target: his mother. For years, she had been the constant presence in his life, the source of resentment, the voice in his head tied to humiliation, control, and emotional damage. Even while he was committing crimes outside, that internal conflict never disappeared. But now, with fear setting in, something inside him snapped into focus. He told himself a story that she would discover everything, that she would become a liability, that she would react in a way that exposed him completely. And in his mind, that made her dangerous. So he made a decision. He returned home in the early hours of the morning, when everything was quiet, when no one would be watching, when the world felt distant and still. What happened inside that house wasn't random violence. It was deliberate, controlled, detached. Years of resentment and fixation came together in a single act that Kemper later described without emotion, as if he was talking about something separate from himself. But it didn't end there. Because after her death, his behavior became even more disturbing. Instead of immediately trying to hide everything, he remained in the house, moving calmly through the aftermath, sitting with what he had done, almost as if he was processing it in real time. Then came the most unsettling part. He didn't just leave. He staged a conversation with her. Remains and act investigators would later struggle to even describe without hesitation. And only after spending time in that environment did he finally leave. But instead of fleeing in panic like most killers would, he did something completely unexpected. He drove for days. No clear destination. No urgency. Just distance. And then, after all of that, he made a call. Not to a lawyer. Not to a friend. To the police. And what he said next would bring one of the most disturbing crime sprees in American history to an abrupt end. After days of driving with no real destination, Edmund Kemper did something almost no one expected from a man in his position. He stopped running and picked up the phone. When he called the police, it wasn't vague, it wasn't confusing, it wasn't a denial or distraction. It was direct. He told them what he had done. At first, the officers on the other end didn't fully believe it. Calls like this weren't common, and when they did happen, they were often unreliable or exaggerated. But something about his tone stood out. Calm. Precise. Almost detached. As they started asking questions, the details became harder to ignore. And then came the confirmation that changed everything. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't confusion. It was real. Detectives moved quickly to locate him, and when they finally made contact, Kemper didn't resist. He didn't try to escape. There was no dramatic confrontation, just a quiet surrender that felt almost unreal compared to the scale of what he had done. But the real shock came after. Once in custody, Kemper didn't stay silent. He talked, and he didn't just admit to one crime. He described everything in detail. Methodically, scene after scene, victim after victim, he laid out exactly what had happened, as if he had been carrying it all for years and finally decided to release it. Investigators were forced to sit and listen to a level of detail that went far beyond what they expected. Not just the acts themselves, but his thought process, his planning, his interpretations of control and power. And through it all, he remained composed. No panic, No breakdown, no visible regret, just explanation, as if he was finally telling a story only he understood. By the end, the scale of it was undeniable. Multiple victims, double life no one suspected, years of deception hiding in plain sight. The man sitting with police officers in bars had been the same man they were searching for all along. And now, there was no question left. Edmund Kemper had been caught. But the most disturbing question still remained unanswered. How does someone live so openly, so close to law enforcement, without anyone realizing who he really was? In the end, Edmund Kemper's story doesn't settle into a clean explanation. There is no single answer that makes everything make sense. Not his childhood, not the environment, not the psychological evaluations, not even the crimes themselves. What remains is something far more unsettling. A person who could appear completely normal on the surface, charming, intelligent, even helpful, while carrying out acts that most people can't even fully process. That contrast is what makes the case so disturbing, because Kemper wasn't hidden in some unreachable place. He wasn't a shadow in the distance. He was integrated into everyday life, sitting in the same spaces as the people trying to find him, listening to the investigation unfold in real time. And still he wasn't recognized. His case forces a difficult reflection on how people are understood or misunderstood based on appearance alone. How easily a likable personality can override suspicion. How dangerous it can be when warning signs are either missed, dismissed, or simply not connected in time. Even years later, debates continue. Was he shaped entirely by his upbringing? Was there something fundamentally different about him from the beginning? Or is it a combination of factors that science still struggles to fully map? What is certain is this: once his internal world and external behavior aligned with violence, the outcome was catastrophic. And perhaps the most uncomfortable part of all is not just what he did, but how long he was able to do it without being stopped. Because the real horror of the case isn't only the crimes themselves, it's how close they were to everyone else the entire time.